It is a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today and to be the opening act for the venerable speakers that are to come. Looking at the theme of the conference and the topic for today in particular, building the world we want to live in through activism, I come from a particular perspective. I work at an international organization that documents grave human rights violations in about 80 countries around the world. We advocate with governments and international institutions for them to implement recommendations that we've developed largely through the testimony of individual survivors of violations. So in thinking about the world we want to live in through activism, I see the incredible work you all are doing in the US as a critical component of the international human rights movement. And what I would like to put forward for you today is that if you don't already see yourselves that way, you should. It's far from an obvious proposition, though, while I have no doubt that everyone in this room is deeply concerned about sexual violence wherever it occurs in the world. What I want to suggest is that it's actually directly relevant to the day-to-day work you do on behalf of survivors in the United States. And that furthermore, in the context of days that never have enough hours and budgets that never have enough resources, it is worth it to think about how to use the international human rights movement in your work. That is, of course, after you've taken the advice of yesterday's presenters and added blogging, tweeting, Facebooking, and perhaps a little bit of musical styling to your repertoire. So I have 3 reasons that I want to put forward for your consideration today. They're the best reasons I've been able to come up with since doing this work about why national and state and local advocates should care about the international human rights movement. So these are those. First, it is the same struggle across the world. Whether we're talking about New York or Nairobi, Beijing or Bayonne, the struggle is the same. That is not to say that context isn't important. It absolutely is. But too often the reporting in the mainstream media on sexual violence occurring in other parts of the world includes a sensationalism that serves to distance it from what happens here. But there are certain fundamental commonalities in the challenges we face around the globe, and our movements are stronger for recognizing those. One of the challenges worldwide is the ongoing struggle to obtain justice for rape survivors and criminal accountability for perpetrators, to turn laws on the books into meaningful protection. In March of this year, I was part of a research team that Human Rights Watch sent to the Dadaab refugee camps in northeastern Kenya. They're about 90 kilometers from the border with Somalia. The Dadaab camps constitute the largest refugee camp in the world, housing about 280,000 people in camps that were originally built to accommodate 90,000. The majority of the camp residents are from Somalia and have fled the violent, protracted conflict that has taken over their country since 1991. My colleague and I were sent to investigate the issue of sexual and gender-based violence against refugee women and girls. In the week that we spent in the camp, we had the privilege of speaking with 60 brave survivors who came forward to tell us what had happened to them in the hopes that it might lead to changes that would keep others safe. Despite our having interviewed various agencies and authorities before this, who said that the greatest obstacle to ending violence against women in the camps was their cultural disinclination to report it, what I was struck by was how many women came to us to say they had reported and saw nothing happen. One woman's story particularly stands out. She described being attacked on a day in October 2009 when she went to collect firewood outside the camp. There were 2 men. One came and hit her friend with a panga, about a machete. When he tried to hit her friend again, she intercepted and her friend ran away. The man punched her in the face. He hit her with the blunt side of the panga repeatedly all over her body. She was convinced that he was going to kill her. She fell down and he raped her. When he finished, he scooped sand with both of his hands and put it in her vagina. He did this about 5 times, and each time, he pushed it in. At the end, he spit on her and told her, "Go to the bush and take your firewood and then go home. If you tell anyone or try to look for me, I will kill you." But she did tell someone. The same day, she went to the police and told them she could recognize the man if she saw him. But days later, when she went to identify the man in a police lineup, The police turned her away without explanation. Having seen no progress in her case in the months since, she summarized the situation succinctly. I am 55 years old. A man rapes me and we don't get help from the police or people working here. My problem is just this man who raped me. I want him arrested. I don't want any other help. I'm tired of giving reports. I want them to make sure we are safe from him. Having come from New York, the parallels to the work my colleagues in the US program were doing on the rape kit backlog in the United States came to mind. And of course, this is work that started in LA in collaboration with many of the groups that are here today. What came to mind was that in both cases, women were courageously going through a process that either involved personal discomfort or risk so that they could see justice come about. In a report that was released this July on the rape kit backlog in Illinois, there was a particularly poignant quote from a rape survivor. The day after my rape kit was collected, I went to the police for my interview. The police officer spent the whole interview asking me about my character, my actions that night. He didn't seem interested in hearing about my rapist behavior. At the end of the interview, he told me he didn't think I had a very strong case. I called for months afterwards to see if they were going to test the rape kit, but I never heard back. In both cases, in Kenya and in Illinois, women were being let down. When confronted with the travesty, authorities said that there were limited resources. In both cases, it was considered acceptable to put justice for rape survivors on hold. Dr. Martin Luther King famously wrote that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That is certainly visible in the confounding replication across the world of situations where women are being told to wait for justice. To let that common challenge get lost in the details is to diffuse our power. For my second reason, I'd like to preface this with another story about an interview that has really stayed with me. About 2 years ago, I spoke with an Eritrean woman who had experienced multiple acts of violence. Jamila, which is a pseudonym I use for her privacy, told me that her mother's family had attempted to circumcise her. Neither she nor her father wanted her to undergo the female genital mutilation, but the extended family on her mother's side kidnapped her and performed the procedure. But it was botched. While leaving her injured, it was not completed according to custom. She faced the fear that they would take her again so that they could finish the job. At the same time, she was attending school and had been befriended by one of the teachers. After giving her help with her homework after school on several occasions, one afternoon he kept her after class and raped her. The thing about this was, I was interviewing Jamila, not in Eritrea, but in Falls Church, Virginia, a suburb of Washington, D.C. She had recently been released from U.S. immigration detention. After the rape and the botched circumcision attempt, Jamila had fled to the U.S. before members of her extended family could organize to have the procedure done again. On arriving in the United States, she sought an attorney to apply for asylum, but found the ones she could afford were long on promises but short on expertise. By the time she found the conscientious attorney who had put us in touch, Jamila already had a final order of removal entered against her and had been jailed by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Like many of the women I interviewed as part of an investigation into the medical care provided to women in immigration detention, Jamila was living with the trauma of what had happened to her in her own country. I raise this as an example of the globalized world we live in which violence and its consequences do not necessarily stay confined within the national borders of the countries where they originated. We heard yesterday about the scourge of trafficking, a human rights violation that happens around and literally across the world. And I know many of you have provided services or advocated on behalf of trafficking victims and immigrant victims of sexual violence, so this is no news to you. In this context, though, the linking of the national anti-sexual violence movement with the international human rights movement is all the more important. Transnational problems require transnational solutions, and the sharing of best practices with advocates from other parts of the world can only serve to strengthen the response to sexual violence here and abroad. Part of this, too, is recognizing that not only does what happens in other parts of the world have impacts here, but what happens here has impacts across the globe, particularly at the level of policy. The International Violence Against Women Act, currently pending in both houses of Congress, is one effort to ensure that ending violence against women and girls stands as a priority in U.S. foreign policy. In conflict situations and in our response to natural disasters and in regular aid efforts around the world, the bill mandates that attention be paid to the heightened risk of violence these situations pose for women. Finally, my third pitch to you is that the international human rights movement presents new opportunities for framing the issue of sexual violence. Like other areas of law, human rights law had to evolve to incorporate a gender perspective. But the progress in the last 2 decades has been substantial. Sexual violence is now recognized as having the gravity of some of the most severe human rights violations. Whereas once rape during conflict was viewed as a collateral consequence of war, now crimes of sexual violence committed as part of armed conflict can be prosecuted as war crimes. Acts of sexual violence committed as part of a widespread or systematic attack against civilians can be classified as crimes against humanity and prosecuted as such. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court specifies that acts of rape, sexual slavery, and forced prostitution, forced pregnancy, and forced sterilization, or any other form of sexual violence of comparable gravity can constitute war crimes or crimes against humanity. It has also been recognized within the human rights framework that sexual violence in certain circumstances constitutes torture. In fact, the Committee Against Torture, which monitors the Convention Against Torture, which the US has ratified, has actually commented that on the United States reports of sexual violence in prison and detention settings. Human rights law also includes a more expansive notion of what a government responsibility entails when it comes to sexual violence. It includes an affirmative obligation to prevent, investigate, prosecute, and punish such violence, including violence by private actors. The obligation is grounded in the rights of non-discrimination, security of the person, and freedom of torture provided in international treaties. This expansive language is being taken up by anti-violence advocates in the US, who in 2008 brought a case to the the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights regarding a case in which the police had failed to enforce a restraining order in Colorado. At the same time, there are more specific opportunities opening up for engaging in the international human rights dialogue on violations occurring in the United States. The US recently submitted its first report to the United Nations Human Rights Council, and Human Rights Watch was among a number of non-governmental organizations that submitted shadow reports to the council highlighting the issue of violence against women in the US. This was also the first year that the United States examined its own record when compiling its annual report on trafficking in persons. The State Department doing this opens up new opportunities to push for expanded protection efforts. I'd like to mention one other opportunity in closing. Human Rights Watch is continuing to expand our work documenting women's rights violations in the United States, and we would very much like to partner with you. We rely on experts like yourselves who see problems as they emerge to let us know where we can be useful. But we also know that perhaps more than any other area, the issue of documentation is very tricky, where there are elevated concerns about survivor privacy and healing. At the same time, documentation is critical for making sure that the public debate and public policy reflect and are responsive to the reality of survivors' lived experiences. I hope that we can work on these dilemmas together, and that by working together, we can come up with a real solution to these issues, and in so doing, build the world we want to live in. Thank you very much.